Good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to have all of you join us today. Welcome to the March edition of the ELC Community Connections webinar series. My name is Hillary Molina, and I'm the Associate Director for University Relations here at Fielding. So the goals of these webinars are to connect and engage with alumni all over the world, and we want to share with you the news and events that are going on at Fielding. So I want to let you know the conversation doesn't stop here. This is being recorded, and any of these ELC Community Connections webinars that we do, we record them and we house them in what's called My Fielding. Many of you may remember this as Felix back in the day, but we have a new and improved version of Felix, and it's called My Fielding. So if you're not in My Fielding right now and you need help accessing that, go ahead and shoot me an email at alumnirelations@fielding.edu, and I'd be more than happy to get you started in My Fielding. And the other great thing about this too is after these webinars, we'd love to have conversation, love to have you engage. So there is a conversation space. Also in My Fielding, you can engage with other alumni, you can engage with students, a lot's going on. So I encourage you again to go ahead and get into My Fielding. So our host for this webinar tonight is special guest Anna DiStefano, who I will introduce in just a moment. But before we get started, I want to let you know a little bit about how this webinar is going to be run today. During any time in this next hour, you're going to have the opportunity to ask questions in the Q&A function, which is at the very top of your screen, a drop-down box that says Q&A. Go ahead and type in your questions there. Both Anna and myself and Kathy, who is also on here as well, who I'll introduce in just a moment, any of us can see those questions so you can communicate with us during the entire webinar. If you need to get a hold of me for any reason with a technical question, I'll be able to respond to you there. But as Anna is going through her presentation, I'll see questions that are coming up, and I'll probably ask her to answer some of those at that time. So you don't have to worry about your sound. You don't have to worry about your camera. You get to sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. So that's all that I have for instructions, and it is my distinct pleasure, first of all, to say Kathy Tyner is also in the call. She's not on the screen right now, but if you do need to get a hold of her, again, the Q&A function is there. But welcome, Anna DiStefano. I don't even need to introduce this fantastic person, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go on mute, take myself off, and it's yours.
Thank you very much, Hillary. That was terrific. What a great introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm not exactly sure who all is actually here with me live right now and who will be listening to this later, but I'm delighted to share my experiences with you. I am clearly not an expert on women in the Middle East. There are some of you in the audience right now who probably have much more experience and expertise on the topic, but I am excited about sharing my experiences of women in particular in higher education in the Middle East. And so I'm glad to be with you, and I look forward to your questions and your comments and your additions and perhaps contradictions to the things that I will share with you. So let me start. So many of us have stereotypes of women in the Middle East, and I'm hoping that this presentation will contribute to going beyond those stereotypes, since I don't think they serve anyone well, either women in the Middle East or those of us who would like to learn more about them. So you may ask yourself, you know, how did a nice Italian-American girl from Massachusetts originally come to travel and work in the Middle East? And all I can say is lucky, just lucky, I guess. And the person in here that really, there are two people in this photo that should take most responsibility for it. One is Gloria Willingham, also known to many of you. And another one is a woman right back here next to me, Elhem El-Hatik. This group of people were the core group of the Worldwide Network for Gender Empowerment, which Dan Sewell, also in this picture, and I helped to found. And Gloria was the associate dean at the time who helped to bring in the first group of people who were working internationally around women's empowerment to collaborate on a variety of projects. So these people included Ani Kalajian, Sue Reamer, HOD graduate, Pat Hinchberger, Joyce Oneko, Andrea Zilkanardkani, and Elham El Atik from Saudi Arabia. So through these people, and through Elham in particular, I came to travel to the Middle East, first to Saudi Arabia, and then later, through my accreditation work, to the United Arab Emirates. So, well, first I will say that these people, all except for Dan, I think all except for Dan and Joyce, are in nursing. And so it's also through this group of people that I became much more knowledgeable about the world of nursing education and international nursing education in particular. I myself don't have a background in nursing, but I was pleased to learn about it through these colleagues. These colleagues made a variety of presentations at various UN NGO meetings. And because of that, we were invited to go to the Middle East, to Saudi Arabia, in collaboration with our colleague Elham. So, trip number 1 to Saudi Arabia. I was invited by Elham. Here I am on the left-hand side with my abaya, but not my headscarf. I was invited by Elham to give the graduation address to a group of associate students graduating from the School of Nursing in Al-Hassa. Al-Hassa is outside of Riyadh, a couple of hours northeast, if I recall correctly. And it's somewhat rural compared to big cities like Riyadh or Jeddah or even Dammam. So in her own understated way, Elham asked if I would come and give the graduation speech to a group of, I believe she told me she thought there would be about 40 graduates in the nursing program. And this was to precede a conference at which all of us associated with Wing would participate. So I arrived that day, was given my abaya, which had been made for me. And of course, before any kind of formal work was to be done, we had coffee, Arabic coffee, and dates, which happens all the time in the Middle East, at least in Saudi Arabia and in the parts of the Middle East I have visited. What does happen all the time, whether it's coffee and dates or something else, is the notion of hospitality. It is, in my experience, not a culture that is about getting down to business. Business is always preceded by an exchange of food and drink and goodwill. And so I was impressed, and I have been impressed actually in all my international travels now, at how much more gracious and hospitable it appears that people around the world are than our work-oriented US culture. So the only thing I wanted to tell you about that speech was that I thought I was speaking to a group of about, 40 maybe, Saudi women who were graduating from this nursing program. And when I walked into that beautiful room, there was a screen set up in the middle of the room, and there were a group of about 200 men on one side and about 200 women on the other side, which was totally unexpected. And my comments had been really directed toward women in the audience, or at least they had been created with the notion of women in the audience. And so I was a little surprised when not only did I have women, but also I tried to find my comments that I gave that day, but I haven't been able to find them. But primarily they were about valuing women's ways of knowing and talking about supplementing scientific knowing with the other kinds of knowing that come from our experiences and our relationships. And so it seemed to go over well, not only with the women in the audience, but also the men in the audience. I was quite taken aback when I looked out at the audience and saw on the women's side, all the women dressed very much the way the women are in this middle photograph, with their black abayas and then their white coats, their white sort of lab coats, and then their faces covered as well. I was told I didn't have to wear the headscarf, and so I chose not to do it for the talk. The interesting thing is that there's quite an art to covering your head, and different countries in the Middle East, women in different countries wrap it different ways, and I never quite figured it out. If I'm going to go back there and do that kind of work, I'm going to have to get some lessons on YouTube or something in terms of wrapping my head appropriately, because it kept falling off and I wasn't doing very well. But here are the, one of the things I was going to say about this photograph in the middle is that you'll see here at the time, this man is the dean. And what I found in all my encounters in both Saudi Arabia and later in the United Arab Emirates was that there are significant numbers of male allies, often in highly placed positions, either in the government, in the families, or in the universities, who are very supportive, at least of women's higher education and employment, and often of gender empowerment. It isn't an in-your-face kind of advocacy, but it is a strong mentoring relationship that many of these men have. And in fact, this gentleman ended up advocating for Elham, who was at the time the associate dean, advocated for her becoming the dean of that school of nursing. She had earned her PhD in nursing from George Mason University in Virginia. We were also treated that evening to a big fair, a fair of all kinds of local arts and crafts. And the women were seated and covered while the men danced for us in the central area. And I noted that the girls, their daughters who are young, of course, do not need to be covered when they are very young. So this was my introduction. This is the first time I'd been to the Middle East, and it was a pretty deep dive for me, I have to say. One more thing that I want to say, and it was just borne out in subsequent visits with other groups of women, was that these women, as you can see in this photograph, are covered, partly because they're being photographed, and partly also because there's a man present. When we would go into that office behind there and just wait for whatever else we were going to be doing, or in between times, they would uncover and often even take off their abayas and have on, slacks and a top. And I came to understand that actually closely looking at their eyes and at the, oops, I keep doing that, I'm so sorry, at the other characteristics of their bodies, how tall they were, how slender they were, or whether they had glasses, or how they wore their makeup, or whatever. So it was interesting to sort of be with women in both covered and uncovered circumstances.
And Anna, I have a question for you. You had spoken a little bit about the mentoring relationship between men and women in higher education, and you just spoke kind of that. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and maybe give an example, or maybe expand on that a little bit?
Well, certainly. First of all, there are in the universities that I've been in, there are male faculty. The students are not mixed. The students are segregated so that there are female classrooms, and this is true in the United Arab Emirates later, male classrooms. But there are male faculty who travel between the two. I don't recall ever knowing of a female faculty member who taught male students, not in Saudi Arabia, which is more strict than some of the other countries, perhaps one of the most strict. But this man, for instance, here, first of all, advocated for the establishment of this school of nursing in a fairly rural area. He advocated for it as a educational facility for Saudi women. It takes a good deal of effort to create such an institution. This one is non-residential because there's the issue of providing transportation for the women, since women cannot drive. And since they cannot be out in public unescorted, there's a whole transportation infrastructure that has to be used to take the women from their homes to school and back. So scheduling is a very big task. But this man and others, Elham had a sponsor in the government who made sure that she had a fellowship to attend school at George Mason. Her brother uprooted his own life and accompanied her to Virginia while she was a doctoral student so that she could complete her degree, so that there are any number of men who are quite supportive of women's education and understand, as I have learned from Elham anyway, that changes in the Middle East of this sort are likely to be evolutionary rather than revolutionary. And some of you may have some thoughts about the fact that right now it seems that some of the other kind of revolutionary movements in the Middle East actually do not seem to favor women's empowerment. So it's an interesting issue.
Yeah, thank
Can I
you
move
very
on,
much.
Hillary?
Yeah, actually, I had two comments here. So for those of you who are online right now, go ahead and shoot Q&As. I can see this and I can jump in and ask Anna some questions. So I had a statement, first of all, from Andrea saying this is a great discussion, particularly as the desire for transnational education is growing in the Emirates and Middle East. So thank you so much for that statement. And Mark Jordan asked a question. Is there religious significance for the women to cover their faces, or is it more of a social expectation?
Well, it's women are expected in Islam to be modest in their dress, and that is interpreted differently by different cultures who are, so that just because they're Islamic or Muslim doesn't mean that they will all be covered in the same way. So you've probably seen pictures, and indeed I saw actual examples of some women who are covered by the burqa. I mean, absolutely from head to toe, with just a sort of small area for their eyes, and you can hardly see who's inside the clothing, to others where, and you'll see, well, you can see some of it in this photo here, where the women cover their hair, but not necessarily their whole bodies. And so, but it is considered a sign of modesty. And I would recommend to you, if there is some literature out there, and some very interesting, what I would consider to be feminist literature, personally I consider it to be feminist literature, about how women ought to have the right to be able to choose whether or not they cover, and that should not be some sort of litmus test for whether or not they are empowered or liberated. You know, for those of us in the West, it seems to be a very big deal that women are covered, as if that is a de facto sort of sign that somehow these women are oppressed. And I personally don't believe that any longer. I'm not sure I ever believed it, but I certainly don't believe it, having experienced these women personally. And I think there's some interesting work out there about how one does not equal the other.
Great, thank you. And I did have another question here. And it might be better for you to answer this later, but I thought I'd bring it up now.
Sure.
So the question is from Andre again: how might distance education or online education opportunities support the evolution of education in this region? And then would the expectations, for example, of women not instructing men still apply?
Distance ed. Okay. So I'm going to come back to that. Okay. Because that's a good question that could take that deserves a longer answer. So I'm going to come back to that. So my second piece of this trip, of trip 1 to Saudi Arabia, involved our wing group participating in a panel on women's empowerment at this international conference on building connections for global nursing. And the amazing thing was that, as Elham said, there had never been a conference in Riyadh where someone spoke about women's empowerment using those words. So we were quite pleased to be there talking about Wing and about how our work together had contributed to our understanding of each other and of actually of improving our understanding about nursing internationally. And so here we are with this is one of the conference organizers, and these are other conference participants. And you'll notice, and I think I have a slide to this effect later, some of these women are from Jordan and Egypt. This gentleman is from Jordan. There are a lot of male Jordanians or Egyptians that come over to do work and teaching. And so this was quite an important experience for Elham to have a group of colleagues and friends of hers come and present on women's empowerment, so that it was really quite wonderful. This effort at educating women for nursing, and later I'll talk about it in the United Arab Emirates, is part of these movements in both nations and in other parts of the Middle East toward I can't even say the word, Saudiization or Emiratization, which means to try to actually develop the local skills and talents, particularly of women, but also of local citizens, and to rely less on people from other countries doing various levels of labor. This is particularly challenging in the Middle East, in the wealthy Middle East countries, because for many people there really is no need, no economic need to work because of the wealth that is distributed among the sort of nationals there. So the labor force, when I traveled to Saudi for the first time, I found myself in the customs line with a whole bunch of Filipino men who were being brought in to be laborers there. Many of the nursing staff in the hospitals are Filipinas. Many of the faculty and also nursing supervisors are UK expats, people from Ireland, Australia, South Africa, and other parts of the United Kingdom, who go there to teach for a while or work for a while. There are the other people who are from the Middle East are often, as I said, from countries like Jordan, Egypt, and Lebanon, who find, number one, the pay very good, the culture supportive of their own values, or at least much more consistent with than some other places. So there's this, you'll see that one of the big issues is, okay, there may be educational opportunities emerging, but what about labor force participation? That's a whole other issue. So there is a great deal of opportunity and need for local women, local meaning Saudi or Emirati, to work in the hospitals and in the universities. But there's a much more variable level of support for that than for education. Sometimes there are husbands or fathers who do not want the women in their families to be working. They, for a variety of reasons, either reflections on themselves or concern about their being exposed to people in the culture. So there are real tensions. There's a real struggle, at least as I experienced it in these countries, between the male allies who understand that women's introduction into the educational environment and into the workplace is the only way that these countries are going to be able to remain, in a sense, run by their own culture and their own people, and others who seem more satisfied to bring in people from the outside to do their work. So let's see here. I don't know if there are any questions that are appropriate. Not just in it. Yes, Andre. It's not just in the hourly or lower level workforce. It's what people are wanting is also for people to assume positions of leadership as well.
Anna, can you ask that question? Because not everybody can see the question necessarily on their screen. Yeah, that'd be great.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Andre asked, is the idea for Saudiization and UAEization to place more locals and nationals in positions of leadership, not just in hourly or lower level workforce, over what sounds like a highly European level of leadership, as mentioned in the university? Yes. And you'll see that this creates a different kind of challenge in the United Arab Emirates in that university. But they would like more and more of the hospitals and the nursing schools and the other areas of education to be led by people from their own country and their own culture, and not dominated so much by people from other countries, especially when they're non-Arab countries. So the second time I went to Saudi Arabia, I went because the university hired me to do some strategic planning consultation. Really, it was education around strategic planning. And so I met with, I don't have pictures in this instance, but I met both with faculty in Al-Hassa and also then in Riyadh. And in Riyadh, they have, as you can see, beautiful, beautiful new facilities, quite elaborate facilities. And in Riyadh, I offered a number of lectures to the whole faculty and also people from the hospital about strategic planning. And then I met with small groups of faculty who were working in specific departments, developing a strategic plan for the School of Nursing. So as you can see here, I'm going to apologize and be very unprofessional, but my dog is barking. So I'm about to let my dog in and the cat. So sorry.
Hey, that's no problem. I can always do a time filler. If for those of you who are still, it looks like we have a couple more participants that have joined in. Just a reminder, please feel free to use the Q&A function. Anna can see the questions. Kathy Tyner, who's also on the call, can see the questions. So go ahead and jump in, and thanks for joining us. Back to you.
Thank you. So sorry for that interruption. So as you can see in Riyadh, there was a bit more, Riyadh likes to think of itself as more cosmopolitan, certainly, than Al-Hassa. And there was a bit more mixing. I mean, for instance, here we are in this auditorium, and there were men and women, excuse me, in the same room, and not necessarily totally segregated and not, you know, separated by any kind of a screen or anything like that. And this photo here, excuse me, in the middle is illustrative of the varieties of ways in which women dressed and presented themselves. Let's see if I have another. No, I want to go back to this situation. The dean of the School of Nursing in the Riyadh campus is a physician. She's an obstetrician gynecologist, a very, very impressive person. the mother of a 2-year-old daughter, a very observant Muslim, excuse me, who took time, of course, to observe the call to prayer, and who was just a very, very accomplished, a person who seemed to live very comfortably in both roles, both as an academic leader and also as an observant Muslim. The other thing that I thought was interesting, this is just an anecdote, which is that we all went out to dinner my last night there. All the women went out to dinner. And we were in a private room in a restaurant, a very nice restaurant in Riyadh. And however, the servers, the waiters, were all male. And so some of the women had their heads covered, but not their faces. But the ones who were observant did have their faces covered when the men came into the room. So we would have this circumstance where people would be eating or uncovered, or we would be taking photographs. And then somebody would knock at the door because they were bringing in the next course, and there was always a significant next course, and the women would all cover, or we were just all posed for a picture, and a man would walk into the room, and the women would all have to cover. And it seemed not to ruffle them or surprise them very much, and they were quite patient with that covering and uncovering experience and phenomenon. My third trip to the Middle East was more recent, and it was part of my being on a Wasc accreditation team to the United Arab Emirates University. You might ask yourself, I thought Wasc was a regional accreditor for fielding and institutions in the West. And that is true, but for a while, Wasc welcomed applicants, and some of the other regional accrediting associations did or do as well, to institutions from other countries. And the United Arab Emirates chose to seek accreditation from Wasc. And in fact, I can now say, because the commission met in February, they have been granted initial accreditation by Wasc. They are, it was probably the best organized Wasc visit that I have ever been on. And I say that with due respect to my colleague, Dan Sewell, who organized a fantastic visit for fielding. But this was an extraordinary visit. We were all given, not to take home with us, laptops, iPhones, there were there were posters everywhere with little, whatever those things are called, where you scan it. And I can't believe I can't remember that. But anyway, where you scan it and you can immediately open up documents. And the campus itself is really extraordinary. So here are some shots of the campus. As you can see, they have a College of Engineering, Food and Agriculture, Science, as well as the sort of liberal arts. If I asked you what percentage of the students at this university are female, I wonder what you would say. Just think about it for a minute. 80%. 80% of the undergraduates at this institution are female. And most of them live in dormitories. Now, this campus does have a male side and a female side. So everything, well, I shouldn't say everything, all the living areas and all that sort of thing are duplicated. So there's 2 of everything. And the library, there's 1 library, but there are female hours and male hours. And there are, in some of the big labs, which, as you can imagine, were quite expensive to build, there are female days and male days so that they can be shared on a sex-segregated basis. So this campus is not in Dubai. We flew into Dubai, nor is it in Abu Dhabi, but it's in a fairly rural area that was a famous oasis, Alumni, and a very lovely, lovely place. And if you're interested at some point, you can see here in the upper left, that is the area where the women students gather to have lunch, hang out, sort of their student union. Only the female students. The males have their own. And then we met with, I'll go right to the middle here. This gentleman in the middle is the Chancellor of the university. And he graduated from the University of Portland. A very, very sophisticated man who has death threats to him regularly from the extremists in his own country and in the Middle East, because he is such a strong advocate for women's education and higher education in general, especially in Western style higher education. All education at UAEU is in English. There are some issues with that because their English varies. They vary in their competence in terms of English, and so there's some question about raising the standard, since the level of student work could be better if their English were better. But in any case, and this was the team. These were the other members of the team on which I served. Let's see.
Anna, this is Kathy. We have a couple questions that might be good right now regarding accreditation.
Okay.
Okay. Lucinda was asking if you could say why the UAE and other institutions want to be accredited by U.S. accreditation agencies. And in that light, are there Wasc standards that have to be adjusted to accommodate the social differences?
Wasc does not adjust any of its standards, interestingly enough. So that's why the instruction is all in English. Diversity needs to be honored within the cultural constraints such that they are of the institution. And they want Wasc accreditation or other regional accreditation in their mind as affirmation of the quality of their education. Mm-hmm. They see it as to use an old term, the good housekeeping seal of approval. The United Arab Emirates, as does Saudi Arabia, sends many of their graduates to graduate school either in the US or in the UK or in other countries. Mm-hmm. And to have their students be graduated from a Wasc approved institution makes their desirability and chances of getting into the better graduate schools even higher. So that's why.
Okay. And we have a comment and another question. This comment is from Andrea, and she says, in some ways, the gender segregation reminds me of more traditional Catholic and other ecumenical secondary and post-secondary institutions here in the United States.
Well, one of the things I continue to, this is a personal note, I keep asking myself, why do I feel so comfortable in the Middle East? Mm-hmm. Every time I tell people that I've gone there, people will, and I'll say, oh, I had a wonderful time. People always say, really? Oh, you did? How could that be? And part of it is, I guess, I did go to a women's college. I did go to a women's high school, girls' high school, in the days actually when the nuns dressed traditionally. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was actually very, very comfortable. Mm-hmm. It very much reminded me of those environments. And I think it's an interesting sort of reflection on my own childhood and my own upbringing.
Yeah, Andrea said exactly. And Mark had a question for you, and this is a great question. Are school resources distributed equitably between the male and female students, especially given that 80% of the student population is female?
Yes. In fact, the only area where I thought there was it didn't make sense to me was that the hours in the library are actually distributed 50-50. And when you have 80%, it sort of reminds me of men's and women's basketball bathrooms at a stadium or something. You need obviously more hours for the female students. There are more of them, trying to seek those resources, and also the assistance of the librarians. So, but the library is one of the things that we recommended, and that they themselves had plans to improve in terms of its services to all students. But yes, the services are equitable. There's no discernible difference in quality. And in fact, one of the things that the UAEU, and I don't know enough about, I certainly don't know enough to say whether this is true elsewhere, is that the quality of the female students in general seems higher in terms of their work, partly because they seem to be taking it more seriously, and seem to understand that the education has more potential for altering their life course than the young men who are there as undergraduates. When I was the Wasc person who met with the students. In every accreditation visit, there's a time when you meet with the students. And this was a fairly large auditorium, and 2/3 of it were female students, and one section were male students. And I don't know whether they self-segregated or whether it just is sort of what happened. Male students sat on one side and the female students sat on another. But there was no panel or anything just dividing them.
Interesting.
I wanted you to know that in this lower left-hand corner, those are 2 of the board members who met with us as a panel, as a visiting team. A woman who was educated as a psychologist in the U.S. at the University of Pittsburgh, and a man who, I can't remember where he was educated in the U.S., but who is a very, very successful businessman based in Abu Dhabi, and who are very, very eager to support education in the United Arab Emirates. Okay, I know that I'm going to sort of see if I can move to a different, stop showing you pictures of me and my friends. I would encourage you to take a look at this report. You can access it on the website of the Population Reference Bureau. Pardon me. The Population Reference Bureau has a lot of really wonderful information for those of you who are interested in international issues, including women's issues. And this is a very, very good reference. Similarly, Brookings has a very recent piece on the potential of educated Arab women, and that's also available on their website. That you can see is very new. And I've come to love infographics, and oops, that was the wrong thing to do, pardon me. I thought I could maybe, but I don't know how to do this now. Oh dear. Sorry, I was going to make this bigger for you, but you can look this up on, it's called Hopes for Women in Education, this one on the left. And it is a wonderful infographic about women's education and employment in the Middle East and Northern Africa. A lot of research that is done groups together the Middle East and Northern Africa, MENA countries. And what you'll see when you go and look for that, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I couldn't make it bigger, or somebody maybe can tell me how to make it bigger, but you can see that LFPR, which is labor force participation rates, LFPR for females continues to be low, even though education rates are increasing. And in fact, unemployment rates by education level are highest for those people who've completed tertiary education. And that's probably because those are the kinds of leadership positions that Andre was referring to below. secondary education is close behind. And there are all these, like for instance, right here, this little candy stripe thing is about whether there are working hour restrictions or industry restrictions in different parts of the world for women. And you can see that, I mean, the size of the figure indicates the number of restrictions. And this one on the left is the Middle East and Northern Africa. So you'll see that the female up here, this one right here, the female labor force participation rate in MENA countries is only 1/3 of the male labor force participation rate. This other infographic, let's see if I can remember where I got it. There's something called the Dubai Women's, I can't remember what it is exactly, but I can get you these references if you're interested in them. And it talks about women in the workplace and the gender divide still in the United Arab Emirates. So that education is part of the puzzle, but it's not the entire solution. It's a, what do they say that? It's a necessary but insufficient condition for the advancement of women in these countries, in all countries probably. Okay, I have another graphic. There we are. So this is my general life pitch, you know, which those of you who've worked with me know I believe in. Why invest in women in any case? I mean, other than the fact that it's the right thing to do. And darn it, how do I do this now? Let me see if I can make this. All right, anybody out there who knows how to make this figure bigger? I don't know how to do it.
You know, I'm not quite sure how to do it within PowerPoint right there, but what I'll do, Anna, is if I could get all of these resources in your PowerPoint, I'd be more than happy to send this to all the participants.
That would be
this
terrific.
Is fantastic information here, and yeah, I'd be more than happy to email that.
That would be terrific.
Yeah.
Because this is a general USAID, and it talks about in economic terms, the payoff for an investment in women's education and participation in society. And I apologize for not testing out whether or not this could get bigger. Why didn't I do that? Oh, well. So let's see what other questions there are or comments. Oh, I can also go back to the distance education. It said if it's not in presenter view, you can enlarge it. Yeah, that's right. Well, let me do that.
Great. And then I do have a couple questions. And Andre, thank you for that.
Yeah, let me go back to that. All right, let me go back. And I can do this now. How's that?
Ah, that's better. All right.
It's better. I'll go down a little. Let me just share some of these with you. 99% of maternal deaths each year occur in the developing world. 1 in 5 girls in developing countries who enroll in primary education never finish. When 10% or more girls go to school, a country's GDP increases on average by 3%. So it's 1 in 7 girls will marry before they're 15 in the developing world. Girls who stay in school for 7 or more years marry 4 years later and have 2 fewer children. So it's a form of population control. 52%, women make up nearly 52% of the global total of people living with HIV. But current approaches to preventing mother-to-child HIV transmission are 98% effective. I'll just say this one because I love this statistic. Women make up 43% of the agricultural labor force. However, they're less likely to own land and they own fewer amounts of land when they do. However, when they own the same amount of land as men, there is over a 10% increase in crop yields. So there are lots of reasons. Thank you, Andre, for giving me that tip about doing this. And to cycle back to the distance education question. Interestingly enough, when I was in Saudi Arabia, Andre's question is, to go back to it again, how might distance education, online education opportunities support the evolution of education in this region? Would the expectations, for example, of women not instructing men still apply? I don't know about the women not instructing men. Perhaps others of you out there have had experience with that. I think possibly not. It depends on the level of contact or the amount of contact. But what I will tell you is that when I spoke with people in Riyadh about the fielding model, I thought it would be perfect for us to enroll a cohort of Saudi female students because the residency requirements were low. When they did come to the NSO or a national session, they could be accompanied by a male relative. I like to think that we are culturally sensitive and respectful of various cultural subgroups. But there is something about face-to-face education that I think is still considered more credible there. And frankly, I don't have a lot of evidence, but I do have some. I think some of the women and some of the male students, for that matter, are eager to spend some time outside the Middle East. I think they would like to have the experience of living in the West, even if they're going to go back home eventually. I think they would very much like the experience of living in a different culture, in the same way that many of our students here in the United States like to study abroad. So it's less attractive than I thought it would be, especially for their best students. I hope that addresses your question. Let's see here. Thank you, Jennifer, for your update on the political election in this country. Let's see here. Jean talked about the fact that she used to edit a Middle Eastern journal and that she learned a good deal. Yeah, I have just found my interactions with people in the East enormously mind expanding, maybe because of my own narrowness of expectation initially, maybe not. But I think whenever I am in another culture, and I've now been in several, especially collaborating on an educational project, what I find is that I'm delighted by both the similarities that we share as human beings, so the connections and the commonalities, and then the differences between and among us, culturally and individually, which I find quite stimulating. So both for me are really important. Jennifer asked a question I have no answer about. What is the attitude in the UAE or elsewhere about educating or employing Syrian refugees? You know, I honestly have no clue. I honestly have no idea. It didn't come up as part of our visit, so I honestly don't know. It's a really great question. Perhaps somebody else in the group does know the answer to that. Mark came up with, Mark Jordan, the strong movement towards empowerment of women in the Middle East. What do I think are the macro, systemic influences that have created the mechanisms of suppression? Is it based on interpretations of Islamic dogma? Right, I mean, from everything I have learned, it's a combination of a particularly conservative form of Islamic religion, as well as and I smile here only because I think that this has been true, at least in my experience in all cultures, is the familial systems are also quite important in determining whether or not a woman advances and is empowered. I mean, who her father is, who her husband is, who her brothers are, can make a huge difference in whether or not various authorities or leaders in the community are challenged. So I think it's both. That's the microsystemic influence. But I think the greatest macrosystemic influence is a particular form of religious adherence. I think that Andre, let's see, there's another comment here. Well, you know what? We're almost out of time, so I think I'll respond to Andre's comment and then see if Kathy would like to close with a few comments about things in general. Andre says that she has a few Middle Eastern students in the master's program in which she's teaching, which is based in Canada, and it's fully online, but they like the face-to-face option via video conferencing, and they've all been women. Yeah, there is something still. I think also there is something still about a culture that is so relational. And I know it's funny to, perhaps it's surprising for some of you to hear me say Middle Eastern culture is quite relational, but it is very relational. And I think that seeing each other face to face is, whether it's virtually or embodied, is very, very important. So let me just see. And Derek Burnett has offered a website, which I think has a lot of good information in it, arabnews.com. And I appreciate that, Derek. I hope you're well. He has a lot of experience in Saudi Arabia. And Kathy, why don't you take it away from here? Are you there, Kathy?
Yeah, I am. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
I had to find my mute button. So thank you, Anna. This was so interesting. We really appreciate it. And it's so fun to see everybody's name and participation tonight.
I know, really.
Yeah.
Great to be with everyone.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, actually, I think, you know, at the last session I shared, and that is a recording, I shared about all of the exciting things that are happening at Fielding and our new School of Leadership, where we will be one School of Leadership with several degree programs and concentrations that students will be able to take across schools, which is very exciting. And then I think, Hillary, you had some announcements to make to set us up for our next. We've got 3 more alumni sessions at this point lined up for you. So.
Yes, thank you so much, Kathy and Anna. This has been such a pleasure. I wish we had another hour for you just to keep talking, and this information has just been fantastic. And I did want to remind everybody who's on that this is will be hosted in my feelings. So I wanted to let you know about some upcoming webinars. The first one that we have, this is a newer webinar. It's on Tuesday, March 29th. It's noon Pacific time, and it's featuring alumna Louise Corver, who is presenting at the summer session at the alumni track. And her title is called Developing Global Leaders in Place. And there will be more information on our alumni website about that. Another special one that is open to the entire university, the entire school, is a special webinar with President Rogers and Provost Porter that will be talking about these specific changes and talking a little bit about the curriculum, but hearing both from the president and the provost about the School of Leadership Studies. That is on Tuesday, March 31st. That's 9 a.m. Pacific time. You definitely don't want to miss this. And just keep an eye on your inbox for a lot of these announcements that will be coming out, and you can always email me too. And another plug for the ELC Community Connections webinar in April. And we will have special guest Jenny Edwards on Tuesday, Thursday, April 19th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And her presentation is titled Invitational Education, Higher Education, an International Perspective. So we have a lot coming up in the next couple of weeks. And last but not least, we're really excited to announce that Fielding is launching a brand new website in the very first couple of weeks of April. The URL will still be the same. It's fielding.edu. So we would like for you to make sure and keep an eye out for that, but we will have upcoming announcements about that. Other than that, again, Kathy and Anna, thank you so much. We really appreciate this. And for everybody on the call, it's great to see your names. And I think we're signed out unless anybody has anything else. Anna, Kathy?
No, it's just such a pleasure to see all of you. I hope all of you come to a session either in Chicago or next winter in Santa Barbara, or that we run into each other somewhere. It's a delight to be with you.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening. We'll talk to you soon.
Good night.
Good night.